simply wore their overall knees out during the harvest season.
After the prunes were picked, they were hauled to the dry yard. There they were dipped in a boiling solution of lye to crack their skins, spread out on trays, and then carried out to be dried in the sun. The Santa Clara Valley climate was perfect for growing and drying prunes. But one year, 1918, the rains came too early.
The fruit began to ferment. The air was full of fruit flies. The odor of the fermenting fruit pervaded the atmosphere and caused one old-timer to say the country smelled like a distillery in distress. The soldiers were at Camp Fremont. Camp Fremont was a training ground for soldiers of World War I. Many of those soldiers were enlisted to come down here to pick prunes. And if you've ever seen a Kansas wheat farmer or a Nebraska corn husker picking prunes in the mud, you've never seen, you've seen something.
In 1917, the growers formed the California Prune and Apricot Growers Association. From their headquarters in San Jose, they mounted a nationwide campaign to extol the virtues of prunes. Their brand name was Sunsweet. In the 30s, Sunsweet produced a film for school children. The message, happiness and success through prunes.
Well, Johnny, have you been showing Bill over the ranch?
Yes, but I want you to prove something to him.
What's the matter? Doesn't he think the fruit is real?
Not that, Uncle Dave. Bill doesn't believe college athletes eat prunes, that they're used on the training table.
Well, well. Serious is all that, eh?
Uncle Dave, you used to be a college athlete. You tell Bill what you told me.
Why, certainly, Johnny. Bill's wrong. Prunes are used very much by college athletes in training. When I was in college, prunes were a regular thing on our diet. When I was on the crew, we also had prunes as part of our daily menu. There are some old pictures taken during my college days, Bill. I like to keep them around to remind me of some very happy times.
Now, do you believe me?
If more people ate prunes, it meant more jobs in the Santa Clara Valley. Jobs for people like Lawrence Bullmore. 65 years ago, he worked at a packing house in Los Gatos. Today, the corner where the packing house used to be is a gas station.
They put up that building. It was a three-story building on what they call a flatiron corner of the Los Gatos and Almaden Road and the San Jose and Los Gatos Road. I believe they now call it the Los Gatos Boulevard or something like that.
In those days, prunes were packed in 10, 25, and 50-pound boxes. The boxes were made by hand.
I don't remember, that's another thing. I don't remember how much we paid, but they were what they called box makers. It was his trade. They went around from packing house to packing house, made boxes so much 100. And it was all hand work. They had what they call a stripper. They had a box, and they'd put that with nails like this in my fingers, see, and the heads up. If you weren't a good box maker, if you took more than 2 blows, you pull it from your finger, put it, put it, put it, put it, put it. That's the way the boxes were made. Then they got a machine that made boxes. You just put them on and stamped your foot, and it was made. That did away with the box maker's trade.
These wooden boxes were lined with paper. Then the top layer of each box was faced. All the prunes lined up in a row to make an attractive display. The women were paid 3 or 4 cents a box, and on a good day could make almost $2. Lawrence Bullmore and his co-workers were paid $2.50 for a 10-hour day.
My working overalls cost me $1. I paid 25 cents for a haircut. From the station, our station, Rogers had a switch, but from our station to San Jose was 15 cents. Okay, for a half a dollar, we could make the round trip, buy 10 cents worth of peanuts, and get a 10-cent seat in the balcony at the Jose Theater. All of that for 50 cents. So you see, $2.50 was good.
In 1880, there was some uncertainty whether prunes or grapes would be the prominent crop in the Santa Clara Valley. By the turn of the century, prunes clearly won out. They were easier to care for, produced a higher yield, and irrigation made them dependable. But grapes continued to be grown, especially by European immigrants like Benjamin Cribari. He started with a small hillside vineyard near Morgan Hill. His son, Anthony Cribari, remembers how they made their first wine.
The way Dad started making his first wine, he cut a 50-gallon barrel in half, so he had 2 halves, put them close together. Grapes came in a 50-pound lug, so he dumped 50 pounds of grapes in a half a barrel, and he had me put on boots, and he said, now jump on those. So I jumped and danced on those until they were pretty well crushed. He said, now move over here. He had put another 50 pounds of grapes in the other one, and he took these crushed ones and put them in these little fermenting tanks, and we went back and forth until he had enough. That's the way he made the wine the first year in the wine business.
The Cribari children went to the country school down the road. School was a luxury for an immigrant farm family, and Anthony was the only son who finished the 8th grade. Before school, he was expected to take his turn cultivating the vineyards from 5 to 8 every morning.
Mother would put up a white flag to show me it was 8 o'clock. A boy wasn't so lucky to have a watch like they do today. So she put up the signal, and I'd come down, tie the horse where Dad left it, and go in and have a little breakfast and change from old overalls and shirt to clean overalls and a shirt and run to grammar school. And after school was out, I had to be home at 3 o'clock, another glass of milk and a cookie, and the horse was waiting there for me, and I'd go up in the vineyard and work till dark. That was a typical day in those days.
Winemaking is still important in the Santa Clara Valley. But today, more and more of the grapes come from somewhere else. As the houses encroached on the vineyards, the valley changed from a growing region to a center for bottling. The old names are still on the label: Almaden, Masson, Mirassou. The Mirassous are one of the oldest winemaking families in the United States, tracing their history back to great-uncle Louis Pellier. Pellier was one of the pioneers of Santa Clara Valley agriculture. He owned a nursery in San Jose, and in 1854 he sent his brother Pierre back to France for nursery stock. Pierre returned with prune cuttings, grapevines, and a wife. His grape and prune cuttings began a planting spree that within a generation turned Santa Clara into a valley of vines and fruit trees. Next to prunes, the most important fruit crop in the Santa Clara Valley was apricots. If you grew up in the valley before World War II, chances are you spent part of your summer cutting apricots for drying. It was an easy skill to learn, so the whole family could take part. For many, it was as much a social event as a job.
When we'd sit down to have our lunch and compare and see who'd cut the most that morning, and what we kept multiplying it by whatever we got a box. We usually got around 10 cents a box. Took over an hour to cut. And we planned all apricot season, how we'd spend our money. That was fun.
The canning companies grew up with the fruit industry in the valley. There were over 50 canneries in Santa Clara County by 1930, each with its own distinctive labels. Canning was seasonal, and the workforce consisted of newly arrived immigrants who used the canneries as a means of earning money to buy their first piece of land in the valley. Tom Foon Chu owned one of the largest canneries. When he died in 1931, 23,000 people attended his funeral. Mr. Chu's granddaughter, Gloria Hom, has studied the Chinese in Santa Clara County.
Oftentimes, when you're talking about the Chinese in Santa Clara County, it's written by well-meaning Caucasians, but they only see one kind of Chinese. And so the descriptions that are often given are baggy blue pantaloons with a blue denim jacket with a bamboo pole over their arm, when in fact there are many other kinds of Chinese. The pictures that I have of my grandfather, he used to wear a suit. Oftentimes he'd be fully dressed in a business suit with cowboy boots and a big cowboy hat and a big cigar. And he looked very Western. And I particularly like the pictures of our family because it shows how they really did assimilate. They acculturated. They brought in so much of the Western dress, Western mannerisms, and still really retained a lot of their Chinese ancestry.
Tom Foon Chu's company was called the Bayside Canning Company. Its first plant was located beside the bay in Alviso. From 1897 to 1935, it was a thriving business. Now it's used for boat storage. Across the street was the Chinese school Mr. Chu started for his employees' children. Unlike most immigrant groups, the Chinese rarely bought land in the valley. They considered their stay in America temporary.
They came here to make a fortune and return to China. And by going into agriculture, then they didn't have to put out any capital. They didn't have to invest anything. They could just be laborers on a farm. It's also a major difference between Chinese and Japanese, that the Chinese would not buy their property. They would lease their property because they didn't want to invest in this country. Whereas when the Japanese came, they came to stay, they bought their property, and now they've got their property. And for the Chinese, they still don't have their property.
When the Japanese were first settling in the Santa Clara Valley, photographers would travel to the farms where they worked and take pictures. Despite the agricultural setting, dress was usually formal. The pictures were to be sent back to Japan. For many lonely Japanese bachelors, these pictures served as an introduction. Prospective brides, if they liked what they saw, would agree to come to America to be married. In 1907, a Japanese farmer named Sakaway bought a piece of land in North San Jose. Today, his son raises pears on that same land.
North San Jose is considered lowland. When my dad first came here, he told me that there were ducks here all summer long. There were tules. We had artesian wells, uncontrolled artesian wells. And they would flood a certain lowland area. And you would have these little minnow stickerbacks and pollywobs and frogs and ducks, geese, snipes. All sorts of games existed north here in San Jose.
When Edward Sakaway's father first came to this country, he could neither read nor write English. For identification, he used his thumbnails.
Being a carpenter, he missed a nail and hit his own nail, so he had a badly split nail on both hands. So if he'd go to a store in town and he wants to cash a check, let's see your right hand, let's see your left hand, and this is okay. In the bank, he would go in the bank and show the tellers both thumbs, everything is okay.
Today, the Sakaway orchards are surrounded by concrete, and their days are numbered. In 1915, the most serious threat was from insects, and the battle was fought with the original hand sprayer invented by John Bean of Los Gatos.
Well, this is the way we used to do way back when I was a little boy in 1917, 1918. Of course, I was 6 years of age when he first put me on to operate this ring. We had it on a low bed wagon, and we used to put the chemicals in here, and we stirred with this hand, then pump with one hand. But I was, being a youngster, I was unable to pump with one hand and stir with the other hand, so I had to use two hands to pump this thing. Well, my dad took the pole and would be spraying the trees up and down. But what was, man, when I was pumping here, it was a very hard job because you have to continuously pumping, or my dad would say, hurry up, we need more pressure, and I would have to go faster and faster. That's quite an
an old antique, and I don't think I'd go back to it today with the modern speed sprayer we have.
In the springtime, when the orchards bloomed, the people of Saratoga held their annual Blossom Festival. From 1900 to 1940, it gave old and young alike a chance to celebrate the beauty of the valley. Not everything about the fruit industry was as pleasant as the Blossom Festival. If frost threatened on a cool spring night, the orchards were warmed by burning oil and open smudge pots.
While the burning oil generated quite a bit of heat sufficient to protect the trees, they also produced huge quantities of soot, and the whole valley would be just immersed in a 100 or 150 feet or more atmosphere that was so dense you couldn't, like a fog, you couldn't see any distance at all. And farming was so important that nobody thought of taking any steps to limit this production of soot that just messed up everybody's, stores downtown. You'd walk downtown and see a show window with maybe fine white clothing material, women's dresses and so forth, and look along the front of the show window, and there would be soot in there, and it would cover some of the stuff on display. But farming was vital, essential, important. This was the industry that paid the taxes, and for a long time, no one dared do anything about it.
Glorious as it was, or as we like to remember it, an era in the history of the Santa Clara Valley is coming to an end. For those few who remember an earlier time, the change is hard to accept.